Welcome to The Word on Campus, where we take a behind-the-scenes look at how some of the best university podcasts get made. Joining me today is Andy Fuller. He is the Executive Director of Brand Content at the University of Notre Dame. And in previous lives, he has been a TV news anchor, communications director for U.S. congressman, PR executive, and now 10 plus years with Notre Dame. So Andy, pleasure to have you.
Robert, I am ecstatic to be here. This is going to be a good conversation.
All right. So 10 plus years, I kind of want to start there. What attracted you to Notre Dame? How'd you start?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, I kind of hopped around a little bit. Actually landed in South Bend at a PR agency, as you noted, and honestly, it's as simple as if you're going to live in South Bend, maybe you should look at working at Notre Dame. And obviously, I respected the institution for a long time. Previously, not an alum, went to school in South Bend, but not at Notre Dame. But just greatly admired kind of the mission and what Notre Dame stands for and the work it's doing in the world as well. And I saw an opening for a job that was very similar to the one I had at the time. So I'm like, I think I'll do that. And sure enough, Notre Dame is a hard place to leave. And here we are, a decade and a little more later, and still loving it. My job's changed several times in my time at Notre Dame, but right now we're really focused on storytelling, and it's a great time to have that focus.
And a little fun fact, because we did find this out about you too. So your brother works there as well?
Yes. And we work together on a number of projects. My brother Tony's a videographer, and we've gone and gathered a lot of stories for Notre Dame, including locations around the world. So that's been a very cool perk. Although it should be noted, in the interview process, they didn't realize that his name's Tony. They didn't realize I was Tony's brother until I had already started. And so they were like, wait, you guys kind of, and yeah, when you see us in the same room, it's very apparent that we are family. But that kind of came later, after the fact.
Yeah, something you realize after somebody mentions it to you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Then you can't unsee it. But
then you can't see it. Well, so when you first started out, was it like video first? Yeah.
No, it's interesting. We at the time operated and folks who've been in higher ed are familiar with the concept of cost recovery, right? Mm-hmm. So we were kind of an on-campus ad agency for the university, and I was kind of the lead account guy. So handling projects for the president's office, for athletics, some of those more external-facing clients that we had on campus. So that was my first role, and then. My passion, I think my talents, my skills lie more in like the storytelling and creative space. And so as the division started to move around and change, this is not long after I started there, a new role was formed, and I stepped into that one as director of what was called strategic content. And we were formed, and for the first time at the university, just to tell stories. And that was kind of our charge. And we've realigned a little bit now again, and strategic content is now brand content. We have a little larger team, still with kind of the same charge, which is help people understand why Notre Dame matters and why they should care about the university.
So, what point did the podcast come into play, and like what was the catalyst for it?
Yeah, it's interesting. So. Strategic content started in 2015, I think was the first year we were actually up and running. And the podcast didn't start for several years after that. I want to say 2018. So we've been doing it about 5 years. And at the time, our vice president was honestly interested in mostly what I would call an earned media play. So he was interested in faculty expertise being shown in such a way that our media relations folks could go to an NPR or whatever. Think kind of like audio, radio platforms, and say, hey, here's our faculty member talking about, XYZ. They sound really good on the air, don't you think? We'd love for you to have them. So that's kind of like the genesis of the idea. But that's not. I feel like that kind of standard interview format is being done a lot. and it's being done well, and there's nothing wrong with that. I was looking for something a little more on top of that. And at the same time, I was just kind of personally getting into podcasts and kind of researching, and the platform had a sort of resurgence in 2012, 13, 14 through there. I was a little late to the game, so I'm several years after. But I remember one. I was listening to the New York Times podcast Caliphate, and a lot's been written about kind of the subject matter of that show, but it was a limited run series, and the production value is what really stood out to me, and how they kind of unspooled that story in a radio format, which was kind of new to me. Like I said, I started in television, and so I was always about video first, but this idea of telling a story just through audio was really fascinating to me. And Caliphate was one of those sort of lightning bolt moments. I mean, I remember mowing my lawn and listening to that and just really being engrossed. And I'm a Midwestern dad, and so if you can distract me when I'm mowing the lawn,
Yeah.
you know the quality, the content's on point. And so, that was kind of one, like, we should maybe look to do something different. And I'm not saying we've ascended to, New York Times levels or anything like that, but that's been kind of our North Star. So we'll have the interview format, and we'll still do a lot of that. But, in one of the episodes we'll talk about, we also tried to just be narrative and just tell a story, and allow for that sort of passive consumption of content of a story that can sort of like provide contours and really explain why your university matters, and give you some of the nuance of the research you're doing, and lives that you're changing as a result. And that can be done through an interview, of course, but man, if you can evoke some emotion, that's how your information really lands with people. And so that's what we've been trying to do, not all the time, but as part of our regular output of the show, provide that sort of narrative element that we can tell stories from.
I think at this point, because I don't think we mentioned it yet, the podcast is called Notre Dame Stories.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that's important detail, and you can find the show notes. And in a few minutes, we're going to play a clip. But before that, I want to ask more question. So, because of your experience, you kind of touched on this a little bit, the difference between like TV or video, audio. How did you approach audio differently?
Some of the principles are the same, right? So I was in news, and a lot of us who are in news would put together what we call a package for the evening newscast, right? So you're using your voice, you're using audio sound bites, and you're just kind of stringing them together so that they all make sense. So I mean, some of that premise is there even for the podcasting platform. I do think you have more room to play with music and with silence. That's where it starts to differentiate between, like the sort of news approach and sort of the storytelling approach, where you don't mind evoking an emotion, and that's how you really influence people, is with emotion. So, you start with the basics. The story's got to make sense. It's got to be coherent. Right, but then on top of that, what are the levels of artistry you can add? What are the levels, devices you can employ that can sort of evoke that emotion and get people to stop what they're doing and lean in a little bit? And it's different for every story that we do. But that's kind of where our mind goes when we start to think about how this all takes shape. A lot of our narrative pieces actually start as video, and we just tell the story a little differently. Certain elements of the story get emphasized for the audio format versus the video, and we can talk a little more about this. But podcasting is actually a deceptively unforgiving platform in that way. When you have a medium where people can see what you're talking about, you don't have to explain everything, right? And when it's just the audio, you have to be really clear about what it is. You're trying to paint a picture in the mind, so you have to be really descriptive. Or you have to have the sound that evokes that image right away too. And we did a series in Ireland, and we were on this mountain stream, mountain trail, and there's this brook kind of, babbling, and it was very picturesque. And so I put the microphone down by the brook just to get that sound. And that's kind of what you have to do. You have to look for the sound that will paint a picture for people. And when you're doing kind of the narrative format. And so every episode that we do this way is a little bit different, and it's finding what are the sounds, what are the ways I can kind of take the audience there to experience this with me.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's a nice segue into an episode right here. So this is coming from the Countless Journeys series, right, of the podcast. And
Right.
so the episode we're going to listen to is specifically about Notre Dame and London. And Andy, can you just give a little bit of context for Countless Journeys and what you want listeners to pay attention to in this episode?
Yeah, so Countless Journeys was a single run. We normally do series like this, and for reasons I can explain later, we just chose to keep this a single episode of Notre Dame in London. One of the big strategic goals for the university is to highlight where we have a presence around the world. We have gateways in Dublin, London, Jerusalem, Rome, Beijing, and that's not something about Notre Dame. And so, just kind of exploring this idea of what are we doing there? What are our students doing there? Is it just a study abroad thing, or are they involved in a little bit more? And that was the sort of mindset going in, is how do we capture that story? As you'll hear, I think our students are doing a lot of different things, and it's hard to tie all of these things together to make kind of one cohesive bundle. Fortunately, London is tied together almost literally by something called the underground, the tube, right? So we used that as sort of like the storytelling device to go from one, scene to the next. So we want to take listeners on us with the tube. And so we are literally getting audio of the tube as we're going from one spot to the next. That's probably enough setup. I think it'll be self-explanatory from there, but that's kind of where this Notre Dame in London podcast episode came from.
All right. So we're going to take a listen to that. All right. 1, 2, 3. Okay, Andy. Yeah, I mean, you can definitely tell that the tube is this big underlying theme for this entire episode. I think it's really creative how you guys did that. I'm curious, like, how did the idea even come about? Like, what was the discussion like?
Yeah, it's funny. This one was something I took on mostly on my own. I do have a colleague who I work with very closely that I can kind of bounce ideas off of this. She's the director of our internal communications. And, sometimes you need, and this is a great tip, sometimes you need another sounding board, especially because most universities, their podcasters are an army of one. I was mostly that way until just fairly recently. And so you need kind of another sounding board to kind of think through. And as we were thinking through this, one of the things that our analytics showed was it is really hard to maintain interest over the course of a series. So we've done series on Jerusalem, similar type thing, taking the audience there. Did a series on Ireland, and we saw drop-offs, right? It's hard to maintain interest over the course of 4 or 5 episodes. So decided, all right, can we do this in just a single episode? And if we did that, what would it look like? And, again, and once you start to narrow down, like we're just going to do one episode, then it actually becomes a little easier because then you're just looking for a way to weave it all together, and then the tube sort of is very obvious that way. So some of the discussions around that were pretty, not very involved. We just kind of made a decision and like, all right, we're going to do this, and then so I wrote it and voiced it and edited it after that. We have a series from London just in terms of web content, video content, social content as well. And this went along with some of that. We have a little more coming. And so, we always want to be sort of in concert with what people are seeing on other platforms as well. It just makes for a little bit more of a force multiplier in that way. So, once we had sort of the concept down, it was just a matter of execution. And editing is one of those things that you can spend a lot of time on. You can go kind of down a rabbit hole if you're not careful. I've been doing it for 5 years, so I'm a little quicker than I used to be, especially if it's just an interview thing. So I mean that takes some time too, and that's another thing people need to keep in mind if you're just starting this. I mean, there is sort of an investment involved.
So really quick question, what editing tool do you use?
We use Adobe Audition. The university has a license for Adobe products, and so I just jumped in with Audition and went from there. I do think most podcast editors, audio editors, are more similar than different. I've heard people using GarageBand even, and for what we do in the narrative space, Adobe's fine. It has more than I'll ever use, honestly, in terms of capabilities. So Adobe Audition.
And kind of like a complementary question to that, for the recording itself, there's a lot of like field live recordings happening in this episode. How did you record? What are you using? And is it just you or just somebody else with you?
Yeah, so the natural sound that you hear there is just me, and so I have it's a what's it called, Zoom H4n recorder. You can get these on Amazon. And then I have, and I think it's called Audio Technica, I think might be the name of the mic. And so I just have kind of an XLR mic and my recorder out there. And just as I'm hearing things that I think might make good sound for the episode, I'm just flipping it on, and that's the tube sound you hear. It's just me, putting it up to a speaker. There is a part in that episode where we happened across a protest. Because it was, part of that episode is our students interning in Parliament, and they were doing it at a very strange time in British politics, because with the turnover of the Prime Minister and stuff like that. So there's a big protest actually on Rishi Sunak's first day in office. Didn't have my recorder with me because I wasn't expecting it, and so I just used my iPhone and recorded video and just pulled the audio from that. iPhones are actually really good pieces of equipment, and in a pinch, they can work just fine. So the audio you hear of like the what I'll call the Muppets protest is just iPhone stuff, and we do that from time to time. I'm out there and saying, "Shoot, I can't get my recorder out, but I got my iPhone," and it's a couple of thumb swipes and you're recording video.
Yeah, you find a way to make it work, and you're totally right. iPhone is a decent alternative.
Yeah, it is, and so and that's a lot of what that your quality should always be first and foremost. But at the same time, there's no need to overthink some of this. That's why I think podcasting has taken off the way it has, is because the barrier to entry is actually quite a bit lower than it ever used to be, and you have the tools sometimes in your literal back pocket to make what can be really good parts of an episode.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned, what I found also interesting in this episode is you have, I believe, 4 students, right, that you're kind of talking with. How do you go with how do you approach the guest selection process? How did you pick these students?
Yeah, so there's 2 things on that. That's a great question. So in this one, we worked with our what's called Notre Dame International. So they kind of oversee our international presence. So these places where we have students, they're kind of on the ground. Like, here's some interesting work being done. So we relied on them. Said, hey, can you give us some students who might be really good? It might be good interviews, might be good at articulating what it is that they're doing and sort of emoting that way. So, and then, they sent us a list, and we, kind of looked down and said, oh, that's really interesting. And they were all interesting in their own right. But given that we have a limited time on the ground, we just try to choose what's the best and what can give us sort of the spectrum of experience, right? So we have one student who's in business, but he's working with Chelsea FC, right? And, that's a very It's a name a lot of people have heard, especially if they watch Ted Lasso, and that seemed to have an appeal. And then of course, like the politics stuff is always relevant. We have one student in there, not to give away any spoilers, who she literally wants to be the president of her home country, and it's like, well, okay, better talk to her, because you never know where that career might lead. She might literally be the president. It's great to have her on our podcast and say we did. So some of those are easier decisions. Most of the audio you actually hear, I talked about using video as sort of a compliment. Most of the audio you actually hear from interviews in that episode was from the on-camera interview. So you're using that setup and that lav microphone for that, and we just scrape the audio and cut it up and use it for ourselves. The audio, the sound bites you need for video are very similar to the sound bites you need for audio. You and even when you're writing too, you have to write for the ear. So in other words, you have to make people understand something kind of the first time they hear it, because they can't read and go back, right? If they didn't quite catch something, they can't go back 2 lines and say, well, I didn't quite get that. You kind of have to be clear right from the bat. And, shooting for video and interviewing that way is a good practice for your audio output as well, because you got to be clear first and immediately.
Yeah, so the video piece is a pretty big part here for your production. Can you paint a picture of kind of the entire team that's involved with the podcast? And I'm also interested in how did you become the host?
Yeah. Default is the best answer. No, I like I said, I was a news anchor, so I had some of that skill set sort of built in. The team. So when it comes to producer for Notre Dame Stories, when it comes to producer, writer, editor, host, that's all me for 90% of the episodes we've done. We have started to spread the wealth a little bit. Remember, my team has taken on a series and done an episode or 2, even editing it. So we're starting to build some of that redundant skill sets on our team. We're actually looking at, and we've had, the colleague I mentioned earlier has gone out and gathered sound bites for an episode we did on commencement as well. So we're actually looking at, all right, now that the team has realigned and sort of skills are a little different and things like that, we're actually looking at blowing it up and saying, all right, am I the right host? Is there someone better suited to this? And then the big thing we're looking to do is back to the video thing. YouTube right now, I believe I read, is the largest podcasting platform.
Which is pretty crazy.
And nuts, just crazy. So what does utilizing that look like? How do we use our video team? Up to this point, they've just kind of been supplying us with sound. But what does it look like? Do we have a video element to our just normal podcast episode going forward? How do we look at that? So, we're probably set up with what we'll be doing for at least the first half of this academic year as we're recording this. But then once the calendar year flips, we might relaunch with something just totally new. Still be mostly similar to what we've done, and I think I'll still have a role in terms of some of these narrative pieces, some of the storytelling through audio. But I don't think I'll be kind of everything.
Yeah.
Maybe in some of the ways that I've had. And it's not because please understand, I'm not saying that I'm the only one who can do this or anything like that. It's just, we've never had the time to sit and say, who else can contribute and what does that look like? And because we are taking that step right now, we're going to end up with a better product. I'm positive as a result. But it takes time to kind of reassess, in that way.
No, this is the moment to kind of reassess. There's a lot of shifts happening just within the podcast industry, even outside of university podcasting. So I think it's smart to do, and looks like I mean I'm excited to see how the show kind of evolves in a sense. So
Yeah, me too. Part of it, I admit, I do like doing a lot of these narrative type things. I just think they're fun to
yeah,
do first and foremost, and but they do take time, and it's that key, it's that aspect of spreading the wealth a little bit, and how do we get contributions from other members of the
yeah,
team who are willing to step in. They just waited for me to let them, I think.
sure.
So, no, we're in a good spot, and it's time to kind of see what's next.
All right, so let me go here. What kind of
hmm
impact have you seen that the podcast has had on the community of Notre Dame?
Yeah, I think there's nothing like podcasting to really provide a depth, an exploration of a topic at depth. So, whereas you might have a 500 word article or something like that, that's kind of one level of depth. But if you really want to explore something and get into the nuances, we've seen, a lot of this is anecdotal, but we've seen people say, I did not know that about whatever topic, Jerusalem. That's really fascinating how, the university is doing this work. Or, we've had a number of faculty member on who are talking about very relevant things in the news. Back when the post office was going through major shifts, we had one of our most popular episodes was that, and we've so that's been kind of depth of an issue, especially timely issues have been key. I do think there is an element of brand affinity that plays in here too. We did an episode where we just told a story about a weird chapter in Notre Dame history involving a crown. People can kind of scroll back and look through it. And it doesn't do anything to highlight our academic reputation necessarily, but it makes you understand Notre Dame a little bit. And our bet is if you understand us a little more, you'll like us a little more. So it fits into that as well. We recently played a football game in Ireland, and we put some money behind our Ireland series for the first time and saw a tremendous impact there. And these are people who we're targeting outside sort of the Notre Dame bubble. So we think we're making some inroads there as well. Again, part of the strategic framework for the university is to let you know that we are around the world, including in Dublin, Ireland. And so that was, I think, a major win for us as well. So it's this idea of understanding an issue at depth and how the university is addressing it, providing timely information, then also brand affinity, where I think we're really seeing impact on that. The only thing I'll mention there is it also is a great way to repurpose content sometimes. If we have some video interviews and we cut that package, okay, cool. Can we also go to our podcast channel as well? Because, communications, right? 101 is kind of go where the audience is, and you need to be where they are. And a lot of people are in their cars, driving to work, and we wanted to have a presence or an option for them to get some Notre Dame content information in that platform and in that way at that time as well. So repurposing has been a nice value add to the podcast as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Andy, we cover a lot in these 30 minutes ish. So
Yeah.
went from the actual production nitty-gritty detail a little bit, and then connecting it back to the overall strategy. And I mean, you just ended on the promotion piece as well. So more to dig into in the future on a different episode.
Right.
But Andy, really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Robert, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.